Hey, it's Coco from Winona Fighter, and you're listening to my weekly mixtape with Brian Colburn.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Joining me tonight as guest curator is Coco Kinnon, lead singer and guitarist for Nashville-based punk group Winona Fighter. Coco, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, since it's your first time on the program, I get to start by asking you my first timer's question, which is, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
Oh man, when I think of mixtape, I remember when I have two older siblings, and I remember when they both got their licenses, I burned them a whole book of CDs. And so when I think mixtape, I think of downloading on LimeWire, burning them on CDs, and just giving them to your friends, family, and just like stuff that I think that they'll like, or like helping them discover new stuff. That's what I love about a mixtape is I feel like it's always someone's approach to what someone else might like.
To me, it is the perfect algorithm because as much as Spotify and Apple Music think they know me as a person, if someone gives me a mixtape saying, here's some songs I think you'll like, they know who I am. And I feel like that just means so much more than an algorithm choosing them.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, tonight, we're going to be talking about 90s punk rock. And a few months back on episode 44, I was lucky enough to have Kay Hanley, lead singer for Letters to Cleo, on the show. And we talked at the beginning of that episode about the indie music scene in Boston, which might be familiar to you because that is where you cut your musical teeth. Am I correct?
Yes, that's true. I grew up as a drummer, and I was playing drums in punk rock bands in the Boston area.
Well, I had a chance to catch your set this past week at the Starland Ballroom in Sayreville, New Jersey, where you opened for Armor for Sleep, Finch, and Bayside. And I just have to say, you guys truly commanded the room. You've also played the 2024 edition of the Shiprocked Cruise, which my friends over at the Itch Rock Radio and Podcast were able to catch that set.
Yeah.
And you also played Bonnaroo 2023 and several showcases at the 2024 South by Southwest Music Festival in Austin, Texas. So I think it's safe to say that Winona Fighter's music has reached a whole new audience over the last year.
Yeah, I think you could say that. Definitely, it's been an eclectic run of shows for us recently, and definitely shows that aren't strictly punk rock, which has been just awesome for us. You know, like getting to play the Bonnaroos, or like opening for bands like we opened for Incubus and The Offspring. It definitely putting us in front of people that we wouldn't normally be put in front of.
Now, when you guys play a show opening for a band that is, let's say, an Incubus, where they're not punk rock, do you find a harder time connecting with an audience, whereas on a show like Finch and Bayside, punk rock is right in that wheelhouse?
I think the thing with the Incubus shows, everyone grew up listening to punk rock. I think that's what helps us, is we get a lot of people who are like, I remember listening to that stuff when I was in high school. So I think we definitely tug on the nostalgic heartstrings with those audiences. And I think it creates such like a great dynamic. So then it's like, you know, we come in blasting, full energy, punk, yelling, and then Incubus comes on, full blasting rock, just melodic, beautiful. I think it's a cool contrast, and I think it helps fill people's cups a little more. Whereas like with the Bayside shows, it's still a similar thing where it's like brings me back to when I first discovered Bayside or XYZ. So
I want to bring up something you did at the show to touch on those nostalgia strings, which you specifically said on stage. You guys performed a cover of Blur's Song 2. And to me, that performance truly cemented the fact that I picked the perfect guest for this evening. With that being said, what were you looking for in the songs that you're bringing to the mixtape this evening?
I was looking for, well, one of the reasons we cover Song 2, and then another cover we do is Self-Esteem by The Offspring. We're a younger band, we're a newer band, and we want to be able to like engage all audiences. And especially when we know we're playing to a little bit of an older fan base. And by older, I mean like not teenagers, you know?
Yes.
It's so fun to engage them by pulling out those songs that like were part of our childhood or teenage years and just kind of bringing everyone back. And so that's what I kind of like looked at when making my playlist tonight. I was like, what makes me feel like I'm driving down the highway at a fine speed, and just like screaming in the car with my friends? Because I think that's what 90s pop punk rock had to offer, was like a lot of just great punk songs with a lot of pop sensibility.
And I love where you're going with that, because for me, the 90s punk spectrum is in a way similar to the 2000s, as the word punk, quote unquote, covers such a huge spectrum. You think about the straight ahead punk bands, you think about your pop punk, and in the 90s we had ska punk, as well as that blurring of lines with hardcore bands and even indie alternative artists that borrowed some of the punk sensibilities and brought them to a mainstream audience while not necessarily being a punk artist. So my goal for tonight was to try to cover as much of this spectrum as possible to give a good representation of what the 90s was in punk music.
Yeah, I was making the playlist and I was like, some of these might ruffle some feathers because a lot of people would probably say, oh, that's not pop punk, or why would you call that song pop? You know, people would get maybe a little up in arms, but it's because it's, for me, like pop punk is punk music that everyone loves. You know, like not everyone listens to No Effects, but anything off of Punk and Drublick is singable and will get stuck in anyone's head, even if you're not a fan of the band, you know? So that to me is what pop punk is.
Well, let's get down to business. Tonight, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Coco and I will be curating a 90s punk rock playlist, and we're going to use the old cassette deck approach. Coco, as my special guest, will begin side A with her first song choice, and then I'll add a song that I feel best follows up that choice. We'll then flip-flop choosing songs until we've mapped out 10 songs for side A. We'll then give our mixtape a proverbial flip, and we'll map out side B, only this time I'll kick things off with Coco choosing second. Our overall goal for the episode is to craft the best 90s punk rock mixtape possible through only 20 songs. At the end of the show, you can take our conversation to the next level by visiting the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com to give our final mixtape a listen via the embedded playlist. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, and so much more. And before we dive into our picks, a few of the Patreon mixtapers chimed in with the songs they would use to kick off a 90s punk rock mixtape with, and I don't think they disappointed. Seeker chimed in with something from Australia, that being Spiderbait's Buy Me a Pony, which he describes as a searing indictment on the music industry in all 105 seconds of rock. Sean Goff chimed in with Gobb's cover of the Rolling Stones' Paint It Black. Tom Hutchinson chimed in with No Effects, like you had mentioned before. He went with Linoleum, Lagwagon's Violins, and Therapy's Nowhere. Ben from the Too Vague podcast chimed in with Chicago's DIY band The Reverse and their track Warning, Attention, Announcement. Chad Lamassa chimed in with Babes in Toyland's Sweet 69. And last but not least, brand new Patreon mixtaper Jen Fink chimed in with L7's Shit List, though she could have went with any of their hits. Jen, first off, welcome to the Patreon Mixtaper family. I'm glad to have you on board, and I'm looking forward to talking music with you over on the forums, and love that pick. Once again, if you'd like to join the Patreon Mixtaper family and chime in on future episodes, you could do so at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. With that, Coco, I'm officially pressing the record button on our mixtape and turning the mic over to you. What song did you choose to kick off our 90s punk rock playlist?
Well, you mentioned it earlier. I'm going to kick it off with Song 2 by Blur.
Nice.
I chose the song because it is truly a personal favorite, and I think that it was written as a big FU to the music industry, and there's not really anything more punk rock than that, than being signed to a label and pissing you off, and you write the biggest hit in the world about it.
Couldn't agree more with what you said there. And I do have to add that you guys did such an amazing cover of that track. I'm going to post a video of it over at myweeklymixtape.com on the episode page, so the mixtapers listening can be sure to check that one out. Now, we're going back to 1997 and their self-titled album here. The thing about this song, it has that punk rock sensibility, that punk rock mindset. But if you listen to Blur's catalog, it's one of those instances where I said it kind of toes the line. The song is punk in nature, but it might have misled people who were introduced to Blur by Song 2 thinking, oh, this is a punk band. They're a lot more indie alternative, but they really brought the punk vibe, flavor, and flair for this track. So I love the opening pick.
Thank you.
I am going to follow that up with something that is very, very punk. And this is a band that in no way, shape, or form has ever leaned outside of the punk spectrum. They are a tried and true punk band, one of the big names in punk, and I think one of the more influential punk bands. And I'm going to go with a song that actually appeared on 2 of this band's albums, the first being 1990's Against the Grain. But the version I'm going to go with is off their album, Stranger Than Fiction, which came out in 1994. I'm going to go with Bad Religion's 21st Century Digital Boy.
Wow.
There's something about Andy Wallace's production on Stranger Than Fiction, on the album, that just hit the sweet spot for me. And Stranger Than Fiction is probably in my top 10 favorite punk albums of all time. So I definitely wanted to go with something from this album. But I will say it's pretty damn hard to choose a 90s Bad Religion song because they had a ridiculous run of punk albums throughout the decade. And for me, the sweet spot is really the 3-album run of 93's Recipe for Hate, 94's Stranger Than Fiction, and 96's The Gray Race, which was produced by one of my favorite producers, songwriters of all time, Rick Ocasek of the Cars. He did that album after his work on Weezer's Blue Album and Bad Brains' God of Love. I think Bad Religion is just an iconic group. I feel they're very underrated. They never hit the mainstream level like a Green Day or a Blink-182, but I don't think you get a Green Day or a Blink-182 without a band like Bad Religion.
Well, I was going to say, it's so bizarre to me that I truly think like Bad Religion, NoFX started to pave the way for punk music in a mainstream way. And, you know, they walked so Blink and Green Day could run. I agree with you. I think they're completely underrated. And I think they should have gotten their wings for sure.
Well, now you get to follow up Song 2 and 21st Century Digital Boy. What are you going with?
Yeah, I'll go with one of your Patreon members recommended because it's high on my list. I'm going to go with Linoleum by NoFX from Punk and Drublick, one of my all-time favorite punk records. And I just, as we mentioned before, I just think that NoFX does such a good job of just having this raw energy and this pure punkness to them, but it could get anyone singing along. And I think if you're looking to dip your toes into punk music, that is like the perfect place to start, is that album.
Oh, God, yeah. 1994. This was my senior year in high school. This was a band that at the time, everybody, at least that I knew, was either listening to hip hop at the time, which was incredible in 1994, don't get me wrong, or a lot of the alternative bands, the Pearl Jams, the Soundgardens, the Alice in Chains. Yet I used to go to this record shop in Kearney, New Jersey. It was called St. Mark's Place, and he was always blasting punk music. And he had this little bin at the front door that had 25-cent CD singles in it. And it was all different bands that I would go on to discover later in life and become huge fans of. And one of the singles I bought was actually the single for Leave It Alone, which is the second track on Punk in Drublic.
Right.
I had that one in my bank, but then at the last second before we started recording, I actually switched it to Linoleum because I thought to myself, real NoFX fans, if they were going to introduce NoFX to somebody who never heard NoFX before, what song would they choose? And I thought Linoleum would be it. And sure enough, that's the one you picked. And I think to introduce somebody to a band like NoFX, if you start somewhere outside of Punk in Drublic, they might not give the band a chance. I feel like Punk in Drublic is their most digestible album for somebody who's never heard their music before.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is such an easy segue into harder punk stuff by listening to that album first. It's one of my just all-time favorites.
And I'm going to follow that up with something that is a little heavier in the punk spectrum. And this one might ruffle some feathers. Not the band. I know right now, when I say the band, everyone's going to go, yes. And then when I say the song, some people I think are going to go, yes. And other people I think are going to go, but what about Ruby Soho? Or what about Salvation? I am going to go with Rancid, but I am going up to 1998's Life Won't Wait, because coming out of Linoleum, I want the Haze and the Hose from Blood Clot.
I like that. I like that take.
I just feel like it's that heavy side of Rancid that still incorporates a little bit of that ska vibe, but it's definitely a lot more aggressive. And don't get me wrong, I love Time Bomb. I love Ruby Soho. And Out Come the Wolves is an absolute masterpiece of an album. But Blood Clot might low-key be my favorite Rancid song of all time. And it was also used for an entire scene in 1999's horror/comedy Idle Hands, yet never made the soundtrack with bands like The Offspring and all these other punk groups. How it didn't is beyond me, but I just love this song.
I think they're a great band. Speaking of segue bands, I think they do have that ska vibe to them, but I don't think it's too much. Like, I think there are ska punk bands that are like in your face, like, this is ska, get used to it, buddy. But they just kind of ease into it, which I really liked. And I think that got me into more ska music was by listening to them first.
They're definitely a way to transition from the punk side of ska to the third wave side of ska, where I would say Rancid is more of that two-tone sound, which you hear in bands, in modern bands like the Interrupters now, versus the third wave ska, which gives you the bands like Real Big Fish, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Goldfinger, that whole scene, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I've done an entire episode on ska punk already, and I probably will do several more because I love that scene. But for some people, it's hard to go from punk to the third wave. They need a band to kind of ease them into that. And Rancid does it so effortlessly, you might not even be aware you're listening to something with a little bit of a ska touch.
Yeah, it's just so nice. It's like, I think it's such a breath of fresh air, just having those little extra touches of ska in there. But it's not gonna blow you out of the water.
Could not agree more. And this has been a pretty heavy first half of side A. What are you following up Blood Clot with?
Okay, I am going to follow it up with Come Out and Play, The Offspring, Smash.
Awesome.
Again, I'm going off of like my favorite albums of all time right now. This album was like a game changer for me, and I think it's a very influential album on Winona Fighter's sound. We cover Self-Esteem, which was also off of Smash, but there's something about Come Out and Play that's got like just a little more aggression to it. It just kind of like has a grit to it that when you listen to Come Out and Play and then it goes into Self-Esteem, you're already amped up and you're like ready to hit those singing along parts in Self-Esteem. And so I think Come Out and Play is one of the best songs on that album, one of the best Offspring songs of all time. Fight Me, I don't care.
It's time to relax, and you know what that means. A glass of wine, your favorite easy chair, and of course, this compact disc playing on your home stereo. Believe it or not, my first copy of the Offspring Smash, I got on vacation with my parents in North Carolina in 1994, and it was on cassette, meaning it did not include Time to Relax on it. I didn't get that joke until getting the CD years later.
It's a 30-year anniversary Smash.
I know. I had Bad Habit on my list, but I could have also, depending on if you started going into the ska realm of 90s pop punk, I also had What Happened to You.
Oh.
It was such an amazing album. They covered so many different styles, and I have to applaud Come Out and Play because at the end of the day, that was the song that introduced me to the Offspring, as well as a lot of people, because this was their mainstream introduction.
Yeah, and I couldn't think of a better one for them. I mean, it's pop sensibility, but it is like there's that grit to it that it's undeniable punk. So I love that song. I love that album. Put it on the playlist.
All right, and I am going to follow it up. I'm going to get a little heavier here, because I had a song on my list that one of the new Patreon mixtapers chose, and I have to agree wholeheartedly. It was one of the first songs I wrote down because I wanted to make sure we were including some of the female punk artists in our mixtape. And the first one that came to mind was L7's Shit List from 1992's Bricks Are Heavy. And that song, to me, I had already been familiar with the album. But 2 years later, I took a then girlfriend to see the movie Natural Born Killers. And the opening scene of that movie, I had no idea what that movie was when we walked into it, and we both walked out with our jaws on the ground. But that movie and this song in that movie just sends it on a whole different level. And at the end of the day, L7 were so influential, and they brought such an aggression that I don't think you get a lot of, at least in the mainstream. I would say that there were groups like Butt Trumpet, which then became Betty Blowtorch, which really leaned into that heavy, aggressive, angry sound. But that was much more in the underground scene. You were not even hearing that on college radio. And the fact that L7 was able to bring their sound to the college level and even some mainstream radio, to me, was such a huge leap. And it's an important thing in the 90s. So I'm going to go with Shit List.
I think that's a great choice. I love L7. I really didn't get into them till about maybe I was 18, 19. But I think there's not a lot of influential females in the punk rock scene. And it's like when you're exposed to such badasses, especially as a woman who is pursuing the same thing, it's just so sick. It's so inspiring. And I think it's just cool to see a band who, one, they're not out here being we're female punk band, they're we're here with the guys, we're rocking, we're rolling, deal with it. And I just think that's sick. I think they're awesome. And man, oh man, would I love to meet them one day.
And I'm not going to lie, I know you guys like to mix in cover songs. After seeing you live and hearing some of the notes that you can hit when you're screaming, I would love to hear you on that third verse of Shit List. I think you would nail that one.
That would be sick.
All right, so what are you coming out of that with?
All right, I will do another one for the ladies. I have Bruised Violet by Babes in Toyland, 1992, Fontanelle. I chose that song because when I was learning how to scream, that was my go-to song. it's so aggressive, and you have to use your voice in such a way that it taught me how to appropriately and like properly sing aggressively or scream while still like protecting my voice. And again, it's just like such an inspiring group that I truly think they're so underrated.
Oh, God.
And I think everyone should get the chance to listen to them.
And I'm also glad that that's another one that we get to check off for the Patreon mixtapers, because Chad LaMassa chimed in with Sweet 69.
Yeah.
I mean, another great song. Again, very influential band. You would not have groups like Veruca Salt, which definitely leaned a little bit more alternative, but they definitely, I hear elements of Babes in Toyland in groups like that in the latter part of the 90s. And I think that's amazing. And it just blows my mind that a group like Babes in Toyland is still regulated to that kind of outside the mainstream cuff. That how did they not break mainstream? Because they're just so good at what they do. It was so effortless.
Yeah, they deserve their flowers. And they did get them within the scene, but I mean, I think they should have been celebrated way more just across the board in the industry. They're awesome.
100%. And I'm going to follow that up with a band that I feel like has gotten their flowers in some sense. And in other sense, I feel like they deserve so much more. Because I used to draw this band's iconic character on every textbook when you would fold the brown paper bag inside out and you'd have your textbooks. They used to make you cover them back in the 90s. I would always draw Milo on my textbooks. And I want to go off of 1996's Everything Sucks. Even though I discovered the Descendants, believe it or not, through the movie Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater, he plays and screams along to their song Wiener Schnitzel during the movie. And I said, what is that band? And I immediately started asking everybody I knew. My older cousin's like, dude, it's the Descendants. And he gave me the cassette. And that was it. I was a Descendants fan. And in 1996, I picked up an Epitaph Records compilation called Punkorama Volume 2. This featured songs from, like I said, Descendants, Pennywise, Pulley, Rancid, Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, Down by Law, Bad Religion. And I think the CD cost me like $3.99. So at the time, it was a no-brainer way to check out a bunch of different punk bands, really, really cheap. There was no streaming music at the time. There was no YouTube. It was either radio, MTV, or your friends. So this was a great way to kind of discover. And I saw a Descendants song on there. And I went, ooh, the Descendants must have a new album out. And sure enough, it was 1996's Everything Sucks. And the song that I chose is actually only 35 seconds long. So I've already spoken at least 3 times longer than the actual song length. However, Coffee Mug is 35 seconds of aggression that puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. And the fact that they snuck the word mug into a 35-second song 13 times shows you the manic intensity you're getting from this one. Yes, it's a little silly. Yes, it's that Descendants sense of humor. But I don't think there's ever been a morning that I've gotten up and walked down to the Keurig without going mug, mug, mug. So I had to go with Coffee Mug.
I think that's a great choice. And I think punk can be a little silly. I mean, we have a song that's just kind of pure satire. And man, the Descendants, we played a festival with them back in 2022, and they were just killing it. They were insane. It was such like it wasn't like shocking, but it was like, holy shit, these guys can still rock. I felt the same way. I saw Youth of Today and Gorilla Biscuits last year.
Nice.
And they were just mind-blowing. And it's so cool to like continue to be inspired by a band that's been around so long.
They're pioneers.
Yeah.
And it shows that, yes, look, the one thing that is imminent in this world is that Father Time always ends up winning at the end of the day. But these guys are out there having done this for decades, and they still command that stage just as well as any of the young bucks with a lot more energy and a lot less back pain can do.
Yeah. And I think that's so one of the reasons why it's so inspiring, because you do like get a lot of the people who are like, well, what are you gonna, because I move around and I thrash around and I am running around. Everyone's like, what are you gonna do when you're 50? I was like, well, I hope I'm still up there playing shows. What are you talking about? And to see those guys kill it, to see Walter and Gorilla Biscuits trying to do like handstands on the drum riser, it's so cool. And it just makes you realize you can do it as long as you want to do it.
Punk is an attitude. It's got nothing to do with age.
Exactly.
So what are you following up Coffee Mug with?
Oh, man. Okay. I am going to go off of the album 1994, Teenage Politics. I'm going to go MXPX Punk Rock Show.
Nice.
I chose this one because I saw them perform it this past fall at Furnace Fest. And it was just another situation where you felt like they were at their peak again watching it. And so I just love moments like that. And now every time I listen to the song, it just brings me back to seeing them perform it live. And I think it's such a good segue for people to get into MXPX. I think it has that, it just energizes you. I don't know. It just, it's probably my favorite MXPX record, probably one of my favorite songs, Punk Rock Show, RAWK.
Well, I love that song. I saw them perform that at the Birch Hill nightclub, it's now a condo development in Old Bridge, New Jersey. But this was one of those venues that was just, to me, one of my favorite smaller, intimate venues where you got to see bigger name bands because the venue just happened to draw them in somehow. And it was always somehow, no matter how big the band was, even if the show was sold out, somehow people always managed to get in. And MXPX was sold out when we got there. And the guy was just like, just give me the money and go up. Like, I don't even know. So I got to see this show. And the one thing I'll never forget about this song, we were right up front during Punk Rock Show. And at the time, I was 315 pounds. And somebody in the front thought that they would be able to jump into me and knock me over in the pit. And I'll never forget, the song was playing and this kid tried to do like a swinging kick into me. And I caught him midair. And he looked me dead in the eye and he goes, that backfired. And I said, it certainly did. And I just flung him up over my head.
Oh, I love that.
So I love that song. I love MXPX. And I'm so glad that they're still out doing what they do, because Mike Herrera is just such an amazing talent, such a great singer, such a great bass player. He plays in Goldfinger now. He does shows with them on bass. So I love it. And to close out side A, we've done such a unique spectrum here. I want to go with another iconic punk rock group. And I want to go with one that, because Coffee Mug was a little bit on the sillier side, I want to go to the other end of that spectrum and do something that's a little bit more introspective. Maybe, I don't want to say serious, but definitely something that when you listen to the lyrics, it can kind of hit you in a way. And this is a song that has hit me decade by decade, more and more as the years go by. And I'm going to go off their 1990 self-titled album, and I'm going with Social Distortion's Story of My Life.
That was on my list.
Nice. There's something about the lyrics in this song. The older I get, the more they resonate with me and the more the song means to me, because you can kind of feel the years behind you in this song. And obviously, film fans will remember this song from Reality Bites. It was in the movie, but not on the soundtrack, which is ridiculous to me, but regardless. And in 2005, Real Big Fish covered the song in a full two-tone ska version on their We're Not Happy Till You're Not Happy album. I don't think you can do a 90s punk episode and not bring up Mike Ness. He is a pioneer in punk. He is somebody that I think the scene has rallied around, looked up to. They've put out such an incredible catalog of albums. And they're one of those bands that never got massive, but are so well respected and so influential. I don't think they ever needed the mainstream because they have somehow cemented their legacy without it. And to me, there's nothing more punk rock than that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say their name and not... I think they were not huge, but they're still like a household name. and I think that's so special. And I saw them open for, I think, the Foo Fighters
Nice.
when I was in middle school. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And then they closed it out with Story of My Life. And I just remember being like wide-eyed, because that's when I was still getting into older punk rock music, like 90s. I was born in 97. So 90s punk rock, that's when I was like kind of diving into it a little more, and just realizing, oh, like you can be a punk rock band, you can have heavier punk rock songs, but you can also have your Story of My Life, which is just so, it's so nice. It's like you're on a beach. That's like what I think when I hear that song. It's just enlightening, and it can't help but like put a smile on your face, and you don't have to be angry all the time.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that's a great one to close it out with.
Well, there you have it, side A of our ultimate 90s punk mixtape, which kicked off with Blur's Song 2, Bad Religion's 21st Century Digital Boy, NoFX's Linoleum, Rancid's Blood Clot, The Offspring's Come Out and Play, L7's Shit List, Babes in Toyland's Bruise Violet, Descendants' Coffee Mug, MXPX's Punk Rock Show, and Social Distortion's Story of My Life. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Now, Coco, we've been talking about 90s punk the entire time, but now I'd like to take some time to talk about 2024 punk, being Winona Fighter's music. As I mentioned at the top of the show, you started off in the Boston music scene before you upped and moved to Nashville. Did you have any musical culture shock when you first made that move? Because Nashville is not one of the meccas of punk rock, at least on paper.
It was a tough transition, but it's what inspired me to start Winona Fighter. And Nashville has a way better rock and alternative scene now, but when I moved here in 2015, I would go to Cafe Coco and the Family Wash and a couple times a week, and I just never felt like I could find what I was missing from Boston. And so I was like, well, I'll just do it myself. So it was definitely a culture shock, but I think it inspired me that much more to have a punk band of my own and get out from behind the drum kit and be a front person.
Well, apologies in advance for the comparison, but you mentioned the band name before, and then you mentioned you were a drummer. So you have taken the quote unquote Dave Grohl approach heading towards the microphone, because you started off on the drum kit, and you're an incredible drummer, I should add, because I saw your older drum cover of the Chainsmokers' Don't Let Me Down, which was awesome. Can you talk about that transition for you from behind the kit to in front of the microphone? Because personally, from my experience as a bassist and a lead singer, depending on what I'm doing on stage, it's a completely different mindset.
Yeah, one really is the Dave Grohl approach. He's my biggest influence. And I think it was nice to be influenced by him as a drummer. And then when I was ready to kind of like make the switch, be like, oh, well, like he did it, I'll do it, And so I think that the biggest like mental change was, I think, the attention that you get as a front person. Because when I was back on the drums, I'm a hard hitter. I am a heavy hitter. And I am like a animal back there. But I couldn't see anyone. So like, I can't see them. They can't see me. I don't have to talk to the crowd. I just have to play these drums as hard as possible. And I think making that transition to being in front of everyone, it took me a second to kind of like realize that all attention is on you. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am so comfortable making little jokes as a front person, is because it makes me more comfortable being up there and being up front. It's like when you joke about your trauma to like make it easier. So I think that was the biggest transition, was not necessarily the aspect of playing live, but just you can see everyone and they see you and it's all eyes on you. So that was the biggest thing.
Well, given your experience on drums, do you personally record the drums for Winona Fighter's tracks in the studio?
I do. Yep. So everything 2023 and forward are all my drums.
Given that, how do you transition the songs from what you recorded to the live stage with your other drummer? Do you let him put his touch or flair on them, or do you try to keep them as close to the studio recordings as possible?
I sent him the recordings, and, we're two completely different drummers. I am a hard-hitting, stick to the basics and play in the pocket, and he is a very talented, loves like the intricate fills and stuff. So I just send him the things, like play the songs correctly, but do what you want to do. And I think that's great. I think it's better that way. I would never, as a drummer, I never liked when someone told me how to play. And so I'm not going to hire a drummer who I know has a different style than me and try to make them change their style. It's like if he's to do something that I hear that I don't like, I'll say it. But at the end of the day, I don't believe in making him a drummer that he's not, because I wouldn't want that. So there's like the pros and cons. Like I know what it's like to be the drummer. But that being said, I also hear everything. So if like one little thing is wrong, I'm like, what was that? It's a very hard gig. I give him all the credit in the world. It's a very hard gig.
Well, I have to ask, because I've been intrigued by the band name since I first was introduced to it. What's the story behind Winona Fighter?
So I started the project, I started writing for it in like 2015, started in 2016. And Dan is an OG member, and we were just going by my nickname for a while, which is Coco, and that's what everyone knows me as, is Coco. And we were on beat and put on these like rock bills and these punk bills, and it just like didn't look right. I hated it. And also I'm very private too, so I'm like, I don't know if I want just like my name as the name. And we did the Father Figure EP, and I was like, do we want to release our debut EP under this name? And so it was actually Austin and I were going back and forth. Like just, we would walk by each other and say a band name, and I would either be like, no, or he would be like, no. And then one night he came up with Winona Fighter. And at first I was like, no. And then I woke up the next morning and I kept playing it over in my head, and I was like writing it down. And he was like, I think that's cool. I think Winona Fighter's cool. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then later that day, I was like, you know what? No, that's sick. Oh, that's how we came up with the name. We just wanted to do something that had like a feminine but also aggressive edge to it. And I think it really resembles us as a band.
Oh, mission accomplished for sure.
Yeah.
And you recently signed to Rise Records. Can you talk about how that connection came about?
Yeah, we had been talking to a few labels and doing the whole shopping our songs around and seeing if anyone bites. And I remember my manager over at Indigoot, he introduced me to Sean, who works over at Rise Records, and we chatted it up. And it was like the first meeting where I felt seen as an artist. I felt like they genuinely cared about what we wanted to accomplish as a band. And they were just like, what you're doing is working. We're not going to make you change anything. We're not going to make you start like doing these TikToks, or we're not going to, if you want to record the whole album in your house, go for it. Like, we're talking to you, so it's working, obviously. And I just felt so good after talking to them. I was like, I don't think I want to talk to anyone else. Yeah, it was like when you're dating around. So, yeah. And then I think it was like after that meeting, they were like, we would love to sign you guys. Obviously, that's a slow process. Cut to 6 months later, January 2024, we signed a record deal with them. And it's probably the most artist-friendly record deal up-and-coming band could ask for.
Amazing. Well, let's take a listen to the band's latest single, I'm in the Market to Please No One. Coco, this track is an anthemic way to stand up for yourself in the midst of toxicity. While the lyrics could feel like it's coming from, I'd say, a place of anger, you've stated that it's much more than that. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I wrote, I'm in the market to please no one. I had found a note. It must have been from like a therapy homework assignment. It was a letter I had written to an ex-partner. And I just felt like so weak reading it. And I think there comes a point in every like musician's career where you realize you have a voice and people want to listen to you. And so I had like never written about this situation before. And I decided if I was going to write about it, then I'm going to do it in a way that's empowering and a way that makes people want to stand up for themselves instead of in a way that is like solemn and I'm a victim and XYZ. It's like, get up, kick some ass, and just kind of be strong. So I was definitely like, it was hard though to get to the process of releasing it, because when I know like when I showed it to Austin and Dan, I was like, but it's not a single. When I showed it to management, I was like, it's not a single though. Because I think it's tough writing about those things, but now that it is a single and it is like out in the world, it's so cool to see how it's resonated with people. I had a dad with a 14-year-old daughter come up to me the other day being like, it is so awesome for there to be like an empowered female in the punk scene. And I had a domestic violence attorney come up to me at the show the other night being like, I send your song to all my clients. Like, how it's resonated is so cool. And it's resonating in the exact way that I felt when I wrote it.
Well, I have to echo what the other father said, because I have a teenager and soon to be teenager, both girls. And when I hear songs like this that empower women, it puts a smile on my face, because that is why I have no problem taking the girls to see the Interrupters, because when I would rather them sing Take Back the Power and other songs along those lines where the power is given and not taken from them. And I think that it's rare in music now. And I'm glad to see more voices coming out with songs like this. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to play a couple of other clips. The first being a song that I think really lit up the Starland when I saw you guys last week, and that is Hams in a Glass.
Got pulled over and I'm getting closer to blowing my f***ing brains out of money. Ain't it lovely to do the same old thing? I don't even know if I really even know what's going down, but do I even wanna know? Hey, who just walks away? Got a sharp and nice, I just can't play nice, I just can't play. No way, no way. No way, no way.
And along with Hams in a Glass, I'd also like to share a clip of another 2023 single from the band entitled Johnny's Dead.
Gotta know
Now, Coco, is it safe to assume that these two songs that I just played, Hams in a Glass and Johnny's Dead, along with I'm in the Market to Please No One and another single you released, I Think You Should Leave, are those part of a larger full-length Winona Fighter album, or is the band taking the singles approach?
I'm a firm believer in albums.
All right.
There will be an album. Over my dead body will there not be an album.
Well, the other thing I wanted to bring up from the recent live set, we talked about it earlier, your cover of Blur's Song 2, which you also covered, like you said, The Offspring's Self-Esteem, and I've seen a video of you guys covering Blink-182's Damn It. What is the band's mindset in terms of covering a song and bringing it into the set? Because from what I've seen live and as well as online, you guys are really hitting the nail on the head with the song choices.
Thank you. I think the whole point of the covers is to engage people who have never heard of us and don't know the songs. And I always say that I believe in shows where everyone can sing along at least once. I mean, it's so freeing. It's such a just exciting experience. And so picking these songs that aren't deep cuts, that are just like, everyone knows this. You don't have to learn it. I don't have to teach it to you. I think that brings excitement to our set for people who have never heard of us and don't know our music. Yeah, I love it. I love doing covers. I think a lot of bands shy away from it, but I think it's a great way to engage the audience.
So with that, is there any chance you guys might record some of your cover songs at some point and release them as studio singles?
I would love to. Yeah, I think I could picture us doing. We did a video of song 2 a while ago, but I would love to record Self-Esteem or maybe even pick something new and do like a studio version of it.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to transition over to side B of our 90s punk rock mixtape, and I get to kick things off. And there's one band that is on the yes, we're going to be obvious list, and I'm going to check it off, but I'm going to go with a song that might not be as obvious. So big name, and I'll say a little bit of a deeper cut. And this song came out in 1995, and it was featured on a soundtrack. And that soundtrack is one of my favorite soundtracks of the decade to a little-known movie called Angus, which really hit home for me. It was a high school movie, and the opening track on the soundtrack was Green Day, and the song is called J.A.R., or Jason Andrew Relva. It's an outtake from the Dookie sessions. It's now on the Dookie box set, but to me, it was always from the Angus soundtrack. Such an amazing opening bass line, right up there with Longview. Mike Dirnt is one of my favorite bass players of the 90s. I love the way he walks during these punk songs, and there's something about Jason Andrew Relva, knowing the story behind the song. It's about a friend of Mike Dirnt's who committed suicide in a car crash. The lyrics are a lot different than the teenage Longview style of Green Day, and it's a much deeper song. And it was at that point that I realized that pop punk could tug at the heartstrings a little bit. And to me, that was a defining moment in punk rock for me, because here was a song that at the time in 1995, Story of My Life didn't hit like it does now. So what I had ended on side A, it took me a long time to realize what those words meant. But the first time I heard Jason Andrew Relva, it hit me and I knew what those words meant. And the song is just on top of the fact that it's powerful, it's also just a ridiculously catchy punk song.
Yeah, I love that song. 90s Green Day will always have a special place in my heart. However, on our van ride yesterday, I was blasting all of American Idiot. You can't tell me that's not a good record, okay?
No, it's awesome.
People my age are haters about it.
Really?
And I'm shutting that down right now. But that being said, 90s Green Day will always just top that for me.
It's weird for me because when people say to me, because I host a music podcast, I get random, like, what's your favorite album by blank? And when people say, what's your favorite album by Green Day? I don't even stop. I go, Insomniac. And people go, what? And they're like, why Insomniac? That doesn't really have a lot of hits on it. And I'm like, aha, exactly. And yes, Brain Stew is my least favorite song on the album because it was the big radio hit. Insomniac was kind of Green Day's kind of flexing their punk rock muscles on that album. And it's the heaviest, most aggressive Green Day album. But as far as single songs go, no Green Day song hits me like Jason Andrew Relva does. So it's like I was really struggling trying to decide if I wanted to go with something off of Insomniac or go with JAR, and that's what I ended up going with.
Okay, well, let me take a look at my list. Okay, you know what? I'm going to follow suit, and I'm going to also do well-known band, well-known album, maybe a little bit of a deeper cut, because I think this song just rips. I'm going to go Year I Was Born, 1997. Blink-182's Dude Ranch, and I'm going to go Josie.
Nice.
With that album as a whole, I think is definitely like more raw as far as Blink-182 goes.
Oh, yeah.
I think they're kind of starting to get into that more produced pop punkness, but it still has that like raw DIY energy to it. And I think Josie's just fast. It's fun. The lyrics are just so wild. And I think everyone can listen to this song. And again, it could be a segue. You listen to this song, and then a Bad Religion song comes on after it. Then a No Effects song comes on after it. I think it's a nice slope to just listening to, punk rock across the board.
Damn It was the song that probably introduced a lot of people to Blink-182 because that was like their first breakout hit.
Yeah.
But Josie was the song to me that told the world we're more than just Damn It. And the first time I heard that drum beat, I'm going, oh my God, what is this madness that's happening in this song? It was almost like a thrash blast beat, but spun into a punk rock form. And it worked so effortlessly.
I think it's such a great song. And I think it definitely ties. It's like a nice little bow on Damn It. It's like, hey, like, we can be this mainstream act, but here's what we're about. So, Josie, 1997, Dude Ranch.
I love it. And I'm going to follow that up. This is where it's going to get a little weird, but that drum beat, as soon as I thought of it, I'm like, what do I want to come out of that song with? And I'm going to go with a song that really is going to be divisive amongst people listening to this episode. And when I say the band name, everyone's going to immediately know that I'm not talking about the band that is currently selling out arenas, because that version is the original Misfits with Glenn Danzig. But I am going to go with the Michael Graves era of the Misfits and the title track from 1997's American Psycho, because that song uses straight up thrash metal blast beats in a punk song and then pivots into a whoa, whoa sing-along, which is very punk rock. So it keeps teetering between, is it punk? Is it metal? Is it punk? Is it metal? And to me, the Misfits of the 90s, the Michael Graves era, is a completely different band than the Danzig-fronted Misfits. This was much more aggressive, has a lot more hints of metal in it, but still carries that macabre nature of the Misfits into the lyrics. But musically, I don't know if I can hear Danzig singing these songs. It was a different band. But I'm just thinking drum-wise, coming out of Josie, that frantic drum beat that Travis Barker's playing, and then you pivot into American Psycho, and you get this blast beat. It's a different song based on everything we've talked about tonight, but I feel like it has a spot here.
I think so too. I agree with you. And Misfits were one of my first introductions to punk rock. I think it would be silly not to add them to the list.
All right. And you are up now to follow Green Day, Blink-182, and the Misfits.
Oh boy. Okay. I'm going to go with a personal favorite, underrated band. And they're still playing today. Completely underrated in my opinion. I'm going to go 1999, FTTW, H2O, the song One Life, One Chance.
Nice.
H2O was one of the first very punk-leaning bands that their melodies are so fucking good, dude.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's raw, it's heavy, but it's so catchy. And I think that they are the perfectly encapsulate, like, when I tell someone, like, about Winona Fighter, and I was like, we're punk, but we have pop sensibility, and we're punk pop, you know? I think H2O fits in that category so well. And I think they're such, like, a cool inspiration for us. So, and Toby Morse is just badass and seems like such a cool guy.
I'm so glad that we're 70 episodes into this show, and now this marks the third time that we've talked about H2O on this show. I have talked about their cover of Like a Prayer on episode 10, the 2000s punk rock playlist, as well as episode 26, the ultimate punk rock cover songs playlist. These guys bring a little bit of hardcore into their sound.
Yep.
But they blend it so effortlessly that they could play a hardcore show and a punk show and fit in as if they were 100% on either side of that spectrum. And that's what I love about H2O's music.
Yeah, I think they're just such a special band where, as you said, I think they could stick them on any bill and they will crush it and they will fit right in. And I think that is a dream for any band, is to be able to do that. And they do it so effortlessly.
Amen. And I'm going to lean into your mindset for your song pick there, because you went with a song that's one of your favorites. And I'm going to do the same. And I'm going to go with a band that also adds a little bit of that hardcore sound into the punk that they put together. And this is a song by a band that I have been a fan of since the 90s. And they're based out of New Jersey. I think they're criminally underrated. And the album I'm going to go from is actually not even available on Spotify. It was released on Earache Records in 1997. So I'm going to have to throw the YouTube video up on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. But the band I'm going with is called IDK, meaning the letters I.D.K. And the song is called Fireman Song, and it's from 1997's Taking on the Monster. This group is, if you're from the New Jersey area and you're in the New Jersey punk scene, you are familiar with them. And they also have grown outside of the New Jersey area. And I feel like this group should have exploded. I was listening to this group when they were still putting out demos on cassette. And for anyone that doesn't know them, they do have some albums on streaming. 1996's EP, To Kill for the Good of the Fight, for the Right to Be Right, as well as 1998's Till Death Do Us Part. If you want to look them up on social, they're on Facebook at IDKNJ. That's all letters, IDKNJ. And I messaged the band on Facebook, and word is there's going to be some new music coming from them in 2024. So if you like what you hear on the episode page, be sure to check out IDK, because like H2O, I think criminally underrated.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how many phenomenal punk bands that could have been easily mainstream just flew under the radar. But I will go with a band that did not fly under the radar. And this one's going to be a hot take as to whether people think it's punk or not.
Uh-oh.
I think this is one of the most punk rock acts ever. I'm going Beastie Boys Sabotage.
Nice.
1994. The thing with punk music is I think it's such an umbrella, and I think it's so cool that, I mean, if I were to do a punk lineup and I put the Beastie Boys on there, they would fit right in. You can't tell me that it's like Beastie Boys, Rage Against the Machine. Like, you can't tell me that those guys are not punk rock as fuck. And that is like a hill I will die on. So Beastie Boys on my list, and one of the greatest punk rock acts ever.
If you've ever listened to the Some Old Bullshit album by Beastie Boys, there's no question that punk was always a part of their sound. Egg Raid on Mojo, Transit Cop, they pivoted to hip hop, but then still brought some of those elements throughout the years. And Sabotage might be one of my favorite pump up songs of all time. Every time that song comes on, if I'm in a car driving, that car is going so much faster than it should. If I'm out for a run, I am throwing my back out. Like, this song just makes you want to smash stuff. And it's done in such a way that even when they performed it live, they performed it on one of the late night TV shows. I want to say it was David Letterman. And they just blew the roof off the place. So I love that pick, and I am 100% behind it. But following that up, all right. I don't know if this would be considered deep or not, but this is another one of those bands that I think they're definitely recognized within the punk scene. I'm just not sure how far beyond it they go in terms of name recognition.
Okay.
This song originally appeared on their 1992 debut album, Don't Turn Away, and it was remixed for a 1994 EP called Over It. However, after the song started receiving radio airplay, their label asked them to re-record the song for 1995's Big Choice, and I'm going with Face to Face and Disconnected.
Nice.
This is the version of the song that was made into a music video, and that is how I discovered Face to Face. And it reached number 39 on the Billboard Modern Rock Tracks chart. So it's not like a massive hit, but it put them into the mainstream, so much so that they were asked to be on the Saturday Morning Cartoons compilation, which is one of my favorite compilations of the 90s. And they did a kick-ass version of, I don't care, yes, kick-ass version of Popeye the Sailor Man. I love this band so much. They are punk to their core, and on the same album, following up Disconnected, the thing I love about the version on Big Choice is there's a hidden track right before Disconnected, and it's about a minute and a half of the band explaining why they don't want to re-record Disconnected. And then boom, it just goes into their new version of it. I think it's brilliant. And then following that was a cover of the Descendants' Bikeage, which we talked about our love for the Descendants on side A. When Face to Face covered the Descendants on this album, I was like, these guys are speaking my punk rock language. And they've done so much over that course of the 90s that I feel like gets overshadowed and overlooked by the bands like the Green Days and the Blink-182, that I would be upset if Face to Face wasn't in this discussion at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. And I think, like, in this playlist, we could do the Green Day, Blink-182, Weezer, if you'd even consider that, all day long. But I think the cool thing is all of these bands that inspired what are now some of the biggest punk rock bands ever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great choice, and I fully approve of it. So I think I will follow that with, oh man, you know what? I'm gonna go just a classic. I'm going to go classic. I'm going to go with Cannonball by the Breeders.
Nice.
That song and that band, again, was one of my first introductions to punk rock or heavy alternative. I think they're badass. I think that they have such a unique sound to them, too. I think they were really inspiring in the way that you don't have to be cookie cutter.
No.
And they were definitely like part of an era where you were getting like a lot of the same stuff, but they definitely stepped outside the box, and I think could be considered a big influence for us. So, but I'm going Cannonball because I think if you're going to listen to the Breeders, if you're going to get into them, start with that song.
As a bass player, of course, that bass line just puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. We've talked about that song on several episodes of the show, including episode 3, The Ultimate Songs of 1993, and episode 17, The Ultimate 90s Indie Alternative Playlist. Anytime I get the chance to talk about the incredible Deal Sisters, I'm all in. That song just immediately captivated me, and the Breeders are influential. There was a time in 1993 where you were getting bands like the Breeders and the Muffs that were bringing these strong female vocalists to the table. And I brought up the Muffs because I think about how sad I am that Kim Shattuck is no longer with us. But like these iconic voices that paved the way for groups like Veruca Salt to come along and continue that, and groups like Winona Fighter. There's a door that got opened with these groups that had these punk stylings, but with a female vocalist. And I feel like that part of the genre didn't get explored enough. And I'm so thankful for groups like the Breeders and the Muffs that kind of made it more mainstream and more digestible. So that way a group like, and I know it's a little bit of a different sound, but a group like No Doubt can come out of the Orange County ska scene and explode to one of the biggest bands on the planet.
I agree. And back to your point about how, I mean, her voice is just so unique. That was really important to me when I was starting to sing in bands and stuff, because like, I don't have this classic voice. I don't have this polished, pretty voice. And it's so cool to listen to another woman who is rocking out and doing it and not have this pretty, polished, classically trained voice. It's unique. It's awesome. And I feel like right now in punk rock, there are a lot of like super talented female front women who do have that just like clean and nice. And I'm going to hit all the high notes and do all the runs. And it can be intimidating for someone like me who doesn't have that type of voice. So looking back in the 90s and getting to be inspired by women in these bands, the Breeders, Babies in Toyland, I think it's awesome.
Wow. Well, following that up, I only have one song left. And we have talked a lot over this episode about cover songs.
Pleasure.
And I would be remiss if I didn't include one of my favorite albums of the 90s, period, hard stop, hands down, because I've always been a cover song fanatic. I talk about covers all the time on the show. When people talk about cover songs, I'm like, oh, have you heard this band's version and that band's version? Because there's something, being a musician myself, I always love to hear how a musician puts their stamp on someone else's art and makes it their own. And a band that I discovered at that same record shop in Kearney, New Jersey, was Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. And this is a group that was made up of some people we've talked about tonight. Fat Mike, NoFX.
Yeah.
You have a guy named Chris Shiflett. While we didn't mention him by name, he is a member of the Foo Fighters. And Me First and the Gimme Gimmes put out an album in 1997 that blew my mind. It was called Have a Ball, plus Bowling Tips from the Gutter Punks. And the opening track on it was a cover of Loggins and Messina's Danny's Song. Anyone that knows the yacht rock song Danny's Song pictures this beautiful folky ballad with nice harmonies. The first time you hear Me First and the Gimme Gimmes version, you're like, whoa, these guys turned this into a punk song. And immediately they blew my mind, because they took a song that my parents would listen to and made it into something that psychs me up. And the entire album does that, doing stuff like Uptown Girl by Billy Joel, Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, Fire and Rain by James Taylor,
Yes.
Rocket Man by Elton John. These guys took my parents' musical discography and spoke to my generation with it. And to me, I love cover songs so much that I had to somehow introduce them into this episode. And if I'm going Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, Danny's Song is the perfect place to go.
I love that. I think that's a great pick. I think that's a great way to kind of like lead us out. And I'm going to end it on a very Winona Fighter note as to why we do covers, is so people can sing along, people have something familiar, and it's just like, so I'm going to end with a sing-along. I started with a sing-along. I'm going to end with one. I'm going Flagpole Sitta by Harvey Danger,
Nice.
1997. If someone gets through our whole playlist and they know nothing about punk, ending it on this song, it's a nice little palate cleanser. Everyone knows it. Even if you think you don't know it, you know it. I love this song. And that's really all I can say, is that I just fucking love this song.
Couldn't agree more. 1997's Where Have All the Merrymakers Gone? This song was actually here's a stupid fact I don't know why I know, but I do because I'm just a big nerd. This was actually featured on the Now One the Now One compilation in the US. One. Like we are at how now what? Like now 100 million? Number one, Flagpole Sitta. And this song is literally every time I've gone to see a cover band in the last 20 something years, they play this and everybody in the room just lights up with happiness and joy. And it's one of those songs that just puts a smile on people's faces. And sometimes there's nothing more punk rock than that as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
There you have it, folks. Side B of our ultimate 90s punk rock mixtape, which kicked off with Green Day's J.A.R., Jason Andrew Relva, Blink-182's Josie, Misfits' American Psycho, H2O's One Life, One Chance, IDK's Fireman Song, Beastie Boys' Sabotage, Face to Face Disconnected, The Breeders' Cannonball, Me First and the Gimme Gimme's Danny's Song, and Harvey Danger's Flagpole Sitta. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Now, Coco, the band has some massive festival shows coming up this summer, including appearances at Ocean's Calling, Louder Than Life, and Aftershock, among others. Along with those big festivals, what does the rest of 2024 have in store for Winona Fighter in terms of touring and new music?
We're finishing up our tour with Bayside in May and then playing Shaky Knees. Otherwise, we're hitting the studio and you can expect new music very, very soon.
Coco, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
Thank you. I had fun.
As did I. I want to thank all the amazing mixtapers for listening, as well as the Patreon mixtapers for chiming in with their picks. Glad we were able to get some of those into the playlist tonight. Remember, you can find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.